It started the way these things always do, not with a big announcement or a press release, but with an Instagram story, a blurry photo from a Cleveland warehouse, stacks of unopened cardboard boxes in the background, and a caption from Sheduer Sanders that simply read, "They're here." Within an hour, they had sold out. The first official run of Sheduer's Cleveland merch, hoodies, caps, a limited edition bomber jacket with his silhouette stitched on the back. If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed. Was gone in 46 minutes. The team shop website crashed twice. People who had never watched a Browns preseason game in their lives were suddenly in a panic group chat, asking if anyone knew a guy who could get one. By lunchtime, fans were posting unboxing videos, tagging Sanders, making jokes about framing the tags, just in case these are worth something in a few years. Even casual sports media picked it up, with headlines like "Rookie QB turns merch drop into cultural moment." Meanwhile, on the other side of the locker room, Dillon Gabriel sat staring at his own stack of boxes. They weren't in a warehouse. They were in his garage. His merch line, launched just 3 weeks earlier, had been a very different story. T-shirts with motivational slogans, "Prove Them Wrong" in block letters, sat folded untouched. A baseball cap with his initials embroidered on the front had been discounted 3 separate times on the team store. And his personal favorite, a long sleeve with a stylized image of him throwing a football, was currently ranked 137 in sales, just above a clearance bin of old Browns keychains from 2018. It wasn't supposed to go like this. Gabriel had been the higher draft pick. He'd started more games. He'd been in the league longer. And in theory, that should have translated into fan interest. But while Sanders was posting behind-the-scenes photos with stylists, Gabriel was uploading a 42-second hype video he'd edited himself on iMovie. While Sanders had his merch modeled by influencers in streetwear shoots, Gabriel's cousin was awkwardly posing the driveway, wearing one of the hoodies. It wasn't for lack of trying. Gabriel had pushed hard for a rebrand after camp, insisting that the merch line needed to capture his essence and tell his story. The problem? His story wasn't resonating. Fans didn't connect with the graphics, the slogans, or the marketing style. "It feels like a dad made this." One comment read, "Respect to Dillon, but this ain't it." And yet, Gabriel doubled down. He shot a mini music video to promote the merch, lip-syncing over a custom beat, while wearing all 3 of his designs in the span of 45 seconds. It got some views, most of them for the wrong reasons. TikTok stitched it into memes. Instagram turned it into a how not to launch a brand tutorial. In the locker room, the difference in energy was impossible to miss. Sanders would walk in after practice to find a pile of packages from fans. Custom sneakers, framed art, handwritten letters. Gabriel would find a single envelope with a return-to-sender stamp and a crumpled note that said "wrong address." Players started joking about it, but not in a cruel way. More like a running gag everyone was in on. If Sanders was spotted doing an interview, someone would yell, "Plug the merch! QB won!" If Gabriel walked in with a box, someone would whisper, "Careful, that's probably from the ghosts of forgotten quarterbacks." What made it sting even more was that the shift in public perception was bleeding onto the field. Sanders' merch success wasn't just a side hustle. It was becoming part of his identity as the face of the franchise. Kids were wearing his gear to open practices. The team shop was putting his name front and center in marketing emails. Local radio was running call-in segments asking, "Who's the better QB and who's got the better drip?" Gabriel, for all his effort, couldn't catch up. His gear wasn't just unsold. It was invisible. No one was wearing it to games. Nobody was posting about it. The few that did were usually making jokes, like the guy who wore Gabriel's hoodie to the gym with a sign taped to it reading, "Bargain bin find." Sanders, meanwhile, had turned his launch into a full-on movement. The designs weren't just sports merch. They were wearable flexes. He collaborated with local artists for a graffiti-style logo, partnered with a vintage shop for a limited run of distress caps, and even released a charity edition shirt where proceeds went to a Cleveland youth program. Every drop sold out faster than the last. In interviews, Sanders played it cool. He'd mention the merch when asked, thank the fans, and pivot back to football, but he knew the effect it was having. The same way a quarterback controls a clock, he was controlling the narrative. He wasn't just winning on the field. He was winning in the culture. The Browns front office noticed too. They weren't blind to the numbers. Sanders' merch was generating revenue they'd never seen from a rookie before. It was attracting younger fans, engaging communities a team had struggled to reach, and building brand loyalty before he'd even played a regular season snap. Gabriel's sales, on the other hand, were polite. That's the kindest word the marketing team could use. The team shop quietly moved his merch to a less prominent section, somewhere between the clearance rack and the custom name orders. Privately, Gabriel was frustrated. Publicly, he tried to laugh it off. It's all love, he told a reporter, grinning through it. I'm just focused on football. But the guys in the locker room knew better. They'd seen him scrolling through social media, watching the Sanders hashtags pile up while his own post barely cracked a dozen likes. One afternoon after practice, Sanders was showing a couple of teammates a design for his next drop, a clean, minimalist hoodie with just his number in small print on the chest and the word unbothered stitched along the sleeve. Gabriel walked by, glanced at the mock-up, and muttered, yeah, well, good luck topping my prove them wrong hoodie. Someone coughed to hide a laugh. It wasn't that Gabriel lacked talent or work ethic. On the field, he was still sharp, still competitive. But in the new NFL, being a quarterback wasn't just about throws and reads anymore. It was about presence, brand, the ability to connect beyond the X's and O's. And in that arena, Sanders was playing a different sport entirely. By the time the season rolled around, the divide had become symbolic. Sanders' merch table at fan events was a mob scene. Lines snaking around the concourse, kids posing for pictures in fresh hoodies. Gabriel's table had space to sit down and plenty of inventory for anyone interested, which most days was just a handful of polite stragglers. The irony? Gabriel's gear was actually cheaper. But cheaper didn't matter when one guy was selling identity and the other was selling fabric. Fans weren't just buying Sanders' merch. They were buying into his story, his confidence, the feeling that they were part of something bigger. In the end, it was never really about shirts and hats. It was about understanding the moment. Sanders knew how to make every drop feel like an event. Gabriel's launches felt like an afterthought. And in the cutthroat world of NFL branding, perception becomes reality. Sanders didn't have to rub it in. He didn't have to post side-by-side sales charts or throw subtle jabs in interviews. He just kept releasing heat and letting the numbers speak. Gabriel kept trying, new slogans, new videos, even a last-ditch partnership with a local coffee shop for a DG latte promotion, but nothing stuck. The rivalry between them had started on the field, but had moved to a new battlefield entirely. And while the scoreboard on Sundays was still up for grabs, the scoreboard in the culture war was flashing in neon. Sheduer Sanders 1, Dillon Gabriel 0. For Gabriel, it was a humbling lesson. For Sanders, it was proof that in the modern NFL, your jersey number isn't just on your back. It's on everything you sell. And if you sell it right, the field isn't the only place you can win. By mid-season, the merch rivalry had become its own subplot in Cleveland sports talk. Sandwiched between injury updates and play breakdowns, hosts would dedicate entire segments to Sheduer versus Dillon, the battle for the fans' closets. Callers phoned in with stories about how they camped outside the Browns team shop at dawn to get Sanders' latest hoodie drop, or how their kids refused to wear anything else to school. The funniest part? Some callers swore they'd try to buy Dillon Gabriel's merch just to support him, only to find it still fully stocked months after launch. It's like trying to buy ice in Antarctica. One fan joked on the radio, "You don't need to rush. There's plenty." Inside the locker room, this merch drama wasn't a sore spot anymore. It was part of the team's daily humor cycle. Every time Sanders dropped a new item, guys would show up to practice wearing it, even the defensive players. One day, Myles Garrett rolled in wearing the bomber jacket from Sanders' first drop, but was sold out, written across the back in silver marker. Everyone cracked up. Gabriel smiled too, though the laugh had that tight, "I'm taking this on the chin" energy. The marketing team at Browns HQ, meanwhile, was quietly keeping score. They had charts, actual charts. tracking unit sales, online traffic spikes, and social engagement every time Sanders posted about his gear. The numbers weren't just strong, they were record-breaking for a rookie. The front office knew what they had on their hands. A quarterback who could move product like a pop star and still drop dimes on Sundays. Gabriel's side of the chart was less inspiring. The spikes barely registered, even after they'd slashed prices and bundled his gear with discount game tickets. At one point, someone suggested a buy Dillon's jersey, get a free hat promo, which felt less like a deal and more like an apology. Gabriel wasn't oblivious. He saw the differences, felt the energy in the building tilt towards Sanders. But instead of retreating, he went all in on trying to reframe his brand. He hired a small creative agency out of Oklahoma, Friends of Friends, who promised to reinvent his merch. The new line ditched the blocky slogans for minimalist designs, earth tones, and a logo that looked like a mix between a football and a lightning bolt. They pitched it as sophisticated sportswear, something fans who wear off the field without screaming NFL merch. It wasn't a terrible idea. In fact, when Gabriel revealed the new line to his teammates, they gave him credit. It looked better, cleaner. But here's the thing. Better isn't always enough. Sanders had already created a sense of need. People wanted his merch because it felt like an extension of his personality. Loud when it needed to be, confident always, tied to moments fans could replay in their heads. Gabriel's rebrand was nice, respectable, but it didn't have a story. The first weekend the new gear dropped, Sanders posted a photo wearing his own hoodie courtside at a Cavs game. Gabriel posted a flat-lay photo of his new shirt on a neatly made bed. Guess which one sold out in hours and which one barely moved a needle? Even the coaches started noticing the spillover effect. Stefanski joked in a meeting that Sanders' merch sales were probably paying for the coffee in the facility. Special teams coordinator Bubba Ventrone quipped that if Sanders kept this up, he'd have his own wing in the team shop by next season. But the real turning point came during the Browns' annual Fan Appreciation Day. The team set up autograph booths, merch stalls, and photo ops. Sanders' line wrapped halfway around the stadium. Fans were holding his gear like trophies, jackets, hats, shirts, all from different drops. Gabriel's booth had a trickle of visitors, most of them politely asking for autographs but not buying much. The two setups were close enough that Gabriel could see Sanders' line never dip below 50 people. One kid, maybe 10 or 11, walked up to Gabriel wearing a Sanders hoodie. Gabriel smiled and signed the kid's football, then said, "Nice hoodie. You know I got some new stuff over there, right?" The kid shrugged. "Yeah, but this one's cooler." That stung, not in a career-ruining way, but in a way that made Gabriel realize the merch game wasn't just about competing. It was about belonging. Fans felt like they belonged to Sanders' story. His gear was a badge of that connection. Gabriel's gear was gear. Later that week, Gabriel pulled Sanders aside after practice. It wasn't confrontational. If anything, it was almost curious. "Man, how do you do it? You're selling hoodies like you're Drake on tour. I can't even get my mom to wear mine." Sanders grinned, but he didn't play coy. "It's not the hoodies," he said. "It's the moments. You give people something to remember, something they want to be a part of. They'll wear it. They're not just buying clothes, they're buying the story." It was simple, but it was the truth. Sanders wasn't just dropping merch at random. He was tying each release to a milestone. First preseason win, first touchdown at home, a rivalry game. The merch became a physical receipt for a memory. Gabriel took the advice to heart. For the next month, he stopped trying to push random gear and waited. Then, after leading a fourth-quarter comeback in a primetime game where Sanders was sidelined with an injury, Gabriel launched a single shirt. The score from that night printed small on the chest, his jersey number on the back. It sold better than anything he'd done before. It didn't dethrone Sanders. Nothing was going to touch that juggernaut, but it was a win. And maybe more importantly, it was authentic. It came from a moment fans cared about. By the end of the season, the rivalry had shifted into something more playful. Sanders still dominated the merch scene, but Gabriel had carved out a little niche for himself. Leaner drops, tied to actual on-field achievements. The team shop even started putting their gear next to each other, turning it into a friendly pick your QB setup. The fans loved it. The media ate it up. And the players? They just enjoyed the show. On road trips, you'd see guys mixing and matching. Sanders hoodie with a Gabriel cap, or vice versa. In the end, Sanders didn't just win the merch war because of hype or style. He won because he understood the connection between brand and moment. Gabriel learned that lesson the hard way, but he learned it. And in a weird way, it made both of them better. Not just as quarterbacks, but as figures in a league where the spotlight doesn't stop at the sideline. Still, every now and then, when Sanders dropped another sold-out line in under an hour, Gabriel would shake his head and mutter, "Ghosts of forgotten QBs are wearing my first drop right now." And Sanders would laugh, toss him a hoodie, and say, "You're welcome for the inspiration." By the time the offseason rolled around, the merch rivalry had evolved into something far bigger than either Sheduer Sanders or Dillon Gabriel expected. What started as a lopsided competition for hoodie supremacy had become a full-blown Cleveland sports phenomenon. Local papers ran feature spreads on the Battle of the Browns brand. Sports radio kept an ongoing Merch Madness segment where callers voted for their favorite designs. Even bars downtown were selling themed cocktails. The Sanders Special, bourbon and sweet tea, smooth with a kick, and the Gabriel Grind, cold brew and Irish cream, an acquired taste. At first, the players found it funny. Sanders would walk into the locker room wearing one of his own limited drops, and half the guys would yell, "Sold out in 45 minutes." Gabriel would stroll in with one of his older designs and pretend to auction it off like a rare collectible. It was banter, pure and simple, the kind of thing that kept spirits up after grueling practices. But as the weeks passed, the rivalry seeped into the team's culture in subtle ways. Sanders' gear was everywhere, on the backs of fans in the stands, on ball boys during warm-ups, even on a few assistant coaches during casual Fridays. Gabriel's merch, meanwhile, was slowly gaining ground, but only after he'd embraced a new strategy. Fewer drops, bigger moments. He'd learned the hard way that constant pushing didn't work. So instead of trying to compete with Sanders drop for drop, Gabriel shifted his focus to releases tied to specific events. When he scored a rushing touchdown against Pittsburgh, he dropped a shirt with a stylized outline of him hurtling into the end zone. When he threw for 300 yards in a surprise start, he released a minimalist hoodie with the stat line embroidered on the sleeve. It worked, sort of. Gabriel's gear still didn't move at the velocity of Sanders' drops, but it sold enough to keep the conversation alive. And that was the key. As long as people were talking about it, the rivalry had fuel. The front office realized the marketing potential too. At fan events, they started promoting Team Sheduer and Team Dillon merch bundles, framing it like a friendly tug-of-war. Fans who couldn't pick a side just bought both. Team revenue quietly climbed, and the marketing department started joking that the quarterbacks were their best free advertising. Still, the disparity remained obvious. Sanders' drops were cultural events. Every time he teased something on social media, an artsy black and white photo, a cryptic 10.22 in his Instagram bio, Cleveland went into a frenzy. People camped out at the team shop. Fans made unboxing videos. Streetwear blogs that didn't care about football started covering the releases. Gabriel's drops, on the other hand, had a more modest rollout. They were dependable, steady, kind of like his playing style, but they lacked that "you'll regret it if you miss this" urgency. He'd sell out eventually, but it took weeks, not minutes. It didn't help that Sanders was now leaning into collaborations. His winter drop included a beanie design with a local skate brand. His spring line had a bomber jacket co-signed by a Cleveland hip-hop artist. These partnerships brought in fans who didn't watch football at all, people who were there purely for the aesthetics. Gabriel's camp tried reaching out to a few brands, but most politely passed. They wanted the guy whose gear crashed the online store, not the one whose merch sat comfortably in stock. And yet, the competition never turned bitter. Gabriel might rib Sanders about buying his own hoodies to boost sales, and Sanders might tease Gabriel about his extended clearance section, but both knew the rivalry kept them sharp, on and off the field. Sanders even admitted to close friends that Gabriel's steady improvement in the merch game pushed him to innovate. "If I stop raising the bar," Sanders said one day after practice, "he's going to catch me, and I can't let that happen." Then came the charity gala. It was a black tie event hosted by the Browns, with players auctioning off game-worn gear for local youth programs. Sanders put up a signed pair of cleats from his first regular season win. Gabriel, thinking strategically, donated one of his original hoodies, the very first piece from his flop of a debut line. He signed it, framed it, and leaned into the failed first attempt narrative. When the auction ended, Sanders' cleats went for an impressive $8,000. Gabriel's hoodie? $12,500. A bidding war broke out between two fans who said they wanted a piece of history. Gabriel couldn't believe it. $12,000 for that hoodie? He laughed afterward. Sanders grinned and slapped him on the back. Told you, man, it's all about the story. The media loved the twist. Headlines popped up. Gabriel's flop hoodie outshined Sanders' cleats at auction. Sports radio debated whether it was a fluke or a sign that Gabriel's brand was finally hitting its stride. Even Sanders had to admit it was a savvy move. From then on, Gabriel leaned harder into storytelling. His merch drops became mini campaigns, complete with short videos, fan contests, and behind-the-scenes content. He wasn't trying to be Sanders anymore. He was carving out his own lane. His stuff might not sell out instantly, but it had staying power. By the end of the season, the merch war had turned into a balanced rivalry. Sanders was still the king of instant sellouts, the cultural moment maker, the guy whose drops were circled on calendars. Gabriel had become the slow burn seller, the one whose gear fans kept buying months after release. At the team's end-of-year banquet, the marketing department presented both quarterbacks with framed charts of their sales figures, not as a competition, but as a celebration. You too, the director of marketing said, have made more off-field impact than any QB duo we've ever had. Sanders smirked. So, I win. Gabriel shook his head. Nah, man, we both do. And maybe that was a real victory, realizing that in a city starved for football success, two quarterbacks had turned a friendly merch rivalry into something that united fans instead of dividing them. Still, as the banquet wrapped up, Sanders leaned over and whispered, "Next drops in March. Better be ready." Gabriel grinned. "Oh, I will. And this time, don't be surprised if I'm the one who sells out in 45 minutes. Whether that would actually happen, well, that was the beauty of it. Nobody knew. But Cleveland was already waiting to find out.